Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right. Hey, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. This is a live episode. It's actually a live joint episode. We're going to publish this over on Smart Business Revolution and also Dr. Weisz'
Inspired
show.
Insider.
Inspired Insider. Dr. Weisz, how you doing this morning?
We have a great show for today.
That's right. This is a topic that we get asked about a lot, which is how do you get more exposure for your company, for your personal brand, for your business? Get in front of clients using podcasts and getting interviewed on more podcasts. How do you get yourself interviewed on more podcasts? And so we have a multi-part answer for that, including some of the best guest etiquette and how to make it a very successful activity, how to get on more podcasts, and how to take it even further. So we're going to hop into that in a second. But first, I'm the host of the Smart Business Revolution podcast. I talk with smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of different companies. Check out my archives. Check out the Inspired Insider archives as well. Jeremy, you've had founders of P90X. What else?
Atari, RX Bar, Big League Chew, many others. And you've had...
Co-founder of Netflix. We had Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, Open Table, Axe Software, so many different great guests. Check out our archives because there's some great advice in there. And we are also the co-founders of Rise25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And first, I want to give a shout out to Scott Anderson and Double Dare Executive Coaching. I'll tell you about him in a little bit. He's been really instrumental. He's an amazing guy, amazing entrepreneur, and a coach. And I'll tell you about him in a second. But first, before we get into that, this episode is brought to you by Rise25 Media, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcasts and content marketing. If you've ever been curious about starting a podcast and benefiting in the way that we have from having great conversations with great people in your industry, influencers, clients, referral partners, strategic partners, I have told people for the 11 years that I've done this that everyone should do it, because even if you're not the next Joe Rogan, you don't need to be the next Joe Rogan. You can build an amazing amount of value for your life. So check us out at rise25media.com or email us at support@rise25media.com. All right, Dr. Weisz, let's dive into this. So the topic is for today, how to get exposure by getting on more podcasts. And first, let's just start with a really broad question, but how do you do it? How do you get on more podcasts? How would you slice and dice this one?
Yeah, so we'll walk through. There's three things on this particular topic. One, you could do cold outreach, right? Two, you could hire someone else to do outreach, whether it's cold or warm. Maybe they know a bunch of people. And three is having your own podcast, and we'll talk about how that can lead to being on more podcasts itself. So we'll start off with the cold outreach piece.
Yeah.
This is a whole different topic in itself, and it kind of lends itself to copywriting and direct response marketing. I think, I went on a stint of having some of the top copywriters and direct response marketers in the world on my podcast. I've interviewed probably over 110 of them. And so I learned a thing or two, and I studied their materials. And so cold outreach, what do you do when you are reaching out?
It's really about breaking through all the noise that's out there. If you're reaching out to someone and you're pitching yourself, I think what people don't realize is that once you've been doing a podcast for a little while, you start really getting a lot of incoming solicitations from PR people, from individuals, from companies. And so you really have to break through, kind of stand out amongst all that noise. So how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that stands out with cold outreach, and you can verify this or not, John, because we get lots of emails, incoming emails for our shows, is personalization. If someone emails me something personal, you can tell if someone looked at the show, they looked at the guest, they looked at me, they looked at LinkedIn. Sending something very personal cuts through the clutter. At least someone put some effort into it. And when I send outreach to people, same thing. I look and try and connect on a personal level with them and look at maybe where they went to school, where their jobs were, anything, right?
Yeah.
So go ahead.
And I have to say that there are a lot of people that do kind of a lazy version of this, and it's so formulaic. You can see it from a mile away, and it looks like this. I love your podcast. I particularly love that episode with insert most recent episode in the first line of the outreach message, and then pivot to, I think this person would be a great guest on the podcast. And they immediately move into, their client. And you can tell very, very quickly that that's the real reason that they're contacting you. So how would you do that better?
I mean, first, I'll give credit to those people. At least they're doing some personalization. So
that's true.
Which is better than most. So even though I think I got one the other day, maybe it was last week, I can't remember, but that they did do that. And I was like, it could have been formulaic, could not, but I'll give them credit for at least personalizing it. And
or at least pick an episode that's a little bit further into the archives, not just the most recent one that was published.
Yeah, I mean, what I would do is I would probably include that, and I would just look actually at their LinkedIn profile and see something, connect with them, and find something that stuck out. Because let's say most people just did exactly what you said, John. You don't want to do what most people are doing, which is just taking their podcast name and their recent episode. But most people are like, John, I saw you used to live in Maryland. Actually, I went to Maryland and it snowed something. I mean, it snowed that day and everything shut down. I'm from Chicago. So I'm like, what's wrong with people in Maryland, which actually happened. But so something personal that's maybe not on their podcast page.
I think that's great advice. Yeah.
And the other thing is from the cold outreach is, finding why you as a guest relates to their show. And finally, I saw you've had these couple people. Actually, I could speak to this topic or something related to kind of pivoting into your story and why you're a fit for the show. Right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And the savvy ones do that. They customize it, they make it unique, or they listen to some episodes and, have a way of connecting it. So that's option one. Option number two is hiring someone to do it for you. Let's talk about some of the pros and cons of that.
I mean, it's funny because you and I probably make 5 to 30 introductions every single day. And, you could hire someone. When you're hiring someone, you're hiring them because they probably already have an amazing network of people that they can reach out to. And they already know, they've already done the research on those shows. They already know if it's a fit or not. So, we're a big advocate for hiring for someone's skill set. And you're not just saying, it took them only a day to get me on 10 podcasts, right? But really it took them 10 years because they built up those relationships over a 10-year period. So maybe they get quick results for you, but it took them a long time to build those relationships. And same thing with us when we're introducing others to say, we may get them on like a couple of shows that they want to get on. It's because we built relationships and we see there's a fit for that guest and with that show. So
the really good podcast booking agencies have done a good job of that, thinking through where it's a fit, and they're not going to recommend someone who's not a good fit. They're not doing spray and pray approach.
It's their reputation in the end, because if they set you up with someone great, well, next time you email them or they email you, then they know, okay, this was great last time, it's going to be great again. So I think we're, hire for the specialization that you need because it shortcuts. Yeah, it may cost you some money, but it shortcuts the process and it's going to save you a lot of time in the end.
Right. So that's option number one is cold outreach. Option number two is hiring someone to do it for you. Option number three is to have your own podcast. And why would that help you to get on other podcasts?
Yeah. And people love, John, we get this question a lot, which is, Jeremy, why would I have my own podcast? It's so much easier just to go on other shows. Like I don't have to do any preparation. I just show up They do that, they then, put it on all the platforms and everything like that. Why would I even bother to have my own show?
It's a great question.
What do you say to people?
I have a long answer to that, but the short version is when you have your own show and you're interviewing others, you have an unlimited list of people who you can connect with, build a relationship with, network with. You're leveraging the principle of reciprocity because you're actually delivering value to them by giving them exposure, putting them on your show. Whereas if you're only connecting with people by being a guest on other shows, you're limited to the small universe of people who have a podcast in terms of your networking strategy, in terms of the people you're building relationships with. And it's also more in their hands.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You're limited to now your destiny is in their hands.
Right. But I love both, truthfully. I love having my own podcast and I enjoy going on other shows as well. And the way that having your own podcast helps you get on other shows is you can reciprocate with one another, either a direct reciprocation or, sometimes, you might interview them and then see if it's a good fit for you to be a fit on their show. I was on one of the Shark Tank podcasts a while back, and that was the way that I did it. I was on their show, or I had the co-host on my show, and then they reciprocated and had me on their show. Yeah.
So I like when you have control of your destiny and you can, like you said, you have the whole pool of people that you can have on your show, but then you can also have people in, having another person who has a podcast is great too, because, when they have lots of connections, right? And when someone comes on my show, I say, hey, I'm happy to introduce you to other people, right? And you're the same way.
Yeah.
And we have them on, they're kind of I consider them a friend when they come on, and I'm happy to introduce them where it makes sense. Now, we always do a double opt-in intro, so it's not, imposing on someone else. We'll always ask them first, but podcasts have a great network of people they know.
Yeah. And there's also a shared camaraderie when I introduce two of my past guests to one another, because there's kind of a connection. I will frequently give them the link to those episodes so that they can check it out. They can learn about one another before they hop on a call together. All right, so that's great. So then let's also talk about how to be a good guest when you are on another show. And Jeremy, you spent years as a senior producer for one of the early groundbreaking successful business podcasts, helping prepare guests to be successful on that show. So talk a little bit about how to be a good guest.
Yeah, so there's two ways to how to be a great guest, and it's during the show and after the show. So we'll talk about during the show for a second. And during the show, it's very simple, and you know this because of also yourself and your dad's work in entertainment business, which is tell great stories, right? All good books, TV shows, movies, what we love about them is telling great stories, and that goes into thinking about, if you are going to be a guest on a podcast, think of some interesting stories that you can tell on that podcast and not really be general, but like real specific about that story, right? Because people will remember that real specific moment. And so it also could be, I don't know if you want to go too controversial, but obviously, something that's a little bit different thought to the normal. And it's also in the hands of the interviewer as well, but make their job easier, right? Like when I had Nolan Bushnell, like an example, I did research on him. I don't know if he was going to, come in and tell he was one of, Steve Jobs' mentors, Nolan Bushnell, founder of
Atari, and Chuck E. Cheese.
And Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah.
So obviously I did research. So I don't know if he would have mentioned this otherwise, but he was one of Steve Jobs' mentors. And in his book, which I listened to ahead of time, he talks about how Steve Jobs offered him $50,000 for 33% of Apple. Okay. And maybe he would have brought it up, maybe not, but I didn't want to leave it to chance. So I asked him, I know that he offered you $50,000 for 33%. Why did you say no to that? And so if he had that story in his arsenal, if you have some like certain interesting stories, bring it up, anyways. Yeah. And people want to listen to that. Like, oh my God, that's crazy. Or so think about what you maybe go through a timeline of your journey And what has been kind of out of the ordinary, crazy, or what's a good story?
Yeah. The other thing I want to say is that you want to really think deliberately about what stories you want to tell, because you can't possibly share every nuance about your life. You've lived a full life and you're multidimensional, but most people are going on a podcast because they have something to promote, a business, a personal brand, a company, something like that. So think about what's the narrative that you want to put out there, because it's probably not the complete narrative. It's not every nuance about your entire life, because some of them are just unrelated to that larger narrative. And so think about how the stories that you do tell relate and reinforce the message and the purpose of why you're going on the podcast. I can't emphasize that enough, because you hear people go on podcasts and they tell stories. You can go on and you can have diarrhea of the mouth and you can tell whatever stories, but it may not help to achieve the ultimate goal, the ultimate reason for doing it. Yeah.
That's a good point. I love
So,
that point.
and let's take the last piece. Last one we want to talk about is how to take it further. Okay, so we've talked about how to actually get on other podcasts. We talked about how to be a good guest. Now we're talking about how to take it further. What are some things that you should do after the interview, Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, taking it further also means being a great guest, and also means, continuing that relationship with the host, hopefully. And, the things are, John, what makes a great guest for you after the show? It means they take it, they share it on LinkedIn, they share it on Facebook, they share it on their social channels, tag you in it so that you can share it. I mean, we are doing those things also, right? We're taking it and we're posting about them, but when they're sharing it and tagging other people to watch it and see it, and then putting it in their, if they have an email list, putting that in there and sending it out to their email list, hey, check it out. So, it makes both of the energy and time of both those people go a lot further with putting it on social media and emailing out. And that goes a long way. I mean, I don't know, not every guest is going to do those things, surprisingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it is so appreciated when you work really hard to create a podcast, to interview someone, to prepare beforehand, when they're prepared, and then afterwards they help you to promote it. They don't just leave it on your shoulders. And then also, just like any thoughtful individual, you think about how else can you be helpful to that person? Are there certain types of introductions? Are there certain types of guests which be a good fit that they could introduce you to? I think about those sorts of things when I'm on. And then taking it even further, how can you take that relationship further? If it's a fit, of course, not everyone is expected to click with everyone else. But if you found a good connection with that person, are there ways in which you can collaborate? Are there synergies between your businesses? Are there ways in which, as we get back into a world of the living where we're interacting with one another in physical spaces again, attending conferences and events and stuff like that, or traveling again, going to someone's city? Can you meet up? Could you meet up and organize a dinner, or attend a dinner, or go to the same conference? And then finally, just some advice and wisdom. Is there anything else specific that you can do, advice or wisdom that you can provide for that person? That's another one.
Yeah. I mean, you've had guests that afterwards they were so gracious, and I still remember those guests, and they go, oh, here's 9 people that I think maybe that are in my network that would be really good for your show. And it's also a gift for them, because then they can say to their friends, hey, I met Jeremy. He's a super nice guy, and his show was fun to go on and make an introduction there.
Yeah. And finally, of course, if you've been a guest on someone else's show and you haven't had that person, if you have your own show and you haven't had that person yet on your show, invite them to be a guest on your show. Or if you don't feel like it's a good fit, perhaps you introduce them to someone else, to another podcast where it would be a fit. And I think it's okay to say to people, to be honest, I don't know if it's the best fit for you to be on my podcast. However, I do appreciate you having me on yours. And I'd like to introduce you to someone else where you can appear on this other podcast where it would be a fit. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I mean, we're all focused on different things at different times and the types of companies and guests. So it may not be a fit now, but it may be a fit in the future. So
Right.
yeah.
Final thoughts, Jeremy, on how to get more exposure by appearing on other podcasts.
No, I think we hit all the points. I mean, really, it is about giving to the other individual, and it's about showing up the best you can for that show, and just put yourself in their shoes. On if you were them, what do you want? You'd want someone to come on that was fantastic storyteller, and then also to promote it afterwards.
Right. Final shout out for Scott Anderson and Double Dare Executive Coaching. Speaking of podcast guests, Scott and I first connected. He was a guest on my podcast and has shared lots of great wisdom with us. And if you're looking for an experienced executive coach who's been in the trenches as an entrepreneur, helping you to break through business plateaus, Scott Anderson and Double Dare Executive Coaching offer really a proven system for scaling your life, your business. He has 30 plus years experience as a proven entrepreneur, started over a half dozen companies, also has a master's degree in clinical counseling. I really don't know anyone who's got quite that background of experience. Really amazing. Check out doubledareyou.us. That's doubledareyou.us. They've got a quick online assessment there, and you can schedule a free business blueprint from Scott. And finally, Jeremy, where can people go learn more about us and Rise25?
Yeah, they can go to rise25.com, check out more. There's a video there. We talk about podcasting, and you could always email us if you have questions about anything related to podcasting. And you could check out more episodes of Smart Business Revolution. He's got some great archives, and then Inspired Insider as well.
And support at rise25media.com. That's the email. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.